So here is a story from Bangladesh. Now, these are brinjal plants. And this is a story about a girl who every other day when she came home from school, she would have to spray pesticides on these brinjal plants. And these pesticides, they were pretty deadly, pretty nasty, and banned in the UK and banned in the US. Banned in many countries, in fact. And her health and the health of the environment declined. She had tummy aches, she had headaches, she had skin irritation. The environment was sick also. And the community was really fed up. And one day, BT brinjal came along. Now, BT brinjal is a GM crop, and BT is a specific compound, a specific protein, which targets pests. So the villagers did not need to use pesticides anymore. And the community flourished and the environment flourished. And this was the result of a GM crop. And often we think of GM crops as really nasty things that are the antithesis of what we can do to help the environment. So what is a GM? What is a GMO and what is GM? GM stands for genetic modification, and a GMO is a genetically modified organism. Genetic modification is often the transfer of a gene from one organism to another, although it is not exclusively this. Now, to me, this is really important because I study environmental science, but I also study biology. I care about both things. So I'm going to give you a bit of context. This is the Flavour Savour tomato, and it was sold here in the UK. Now, we have gone backwards since the Flavour Savour tomato. The first GMO was in 1973. The Flavour Savour tomato came out in 1994, and some of you may have even eaten this tomato. To me, this is a really strange thing, because normally with technology, we go forwards, not backwards. And I feel that the result of going backwards is really damaging, not only to our environment, but to our society. So, what are the arguments against? Why would someone be against a GMO, a genetically modified organism? Well, there are health arguments. So, do you trust the World Health Organization?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. So they suggest that, or they have found, that all GMOs on the market are safe for human consumption. Now, this is amazing when they are banned in the EU, right? So, also there are ecological arguments. Now, there's this idea, I don't know if you've heard of superweeds, but there's this idea that the genes from a crop will transfer to weeds, and that these weeds will have special properties and we won't be able to combat them, and they will be superweeds. But actually, you're more likely to create a superweed through applying pesticides, herbicides onto the environment. And over time, with evolutionary processes, you'll end up with a superweed. It's far more likely than genes transferring. And also, a lot of genes are pretty harmless. If you look at biofortification, you have, for instance, beta-carotene in a plant. What's that going to do if it transfers to another plant? Well, produce something for vitamin A, but really, should we be worried about this? I don't think so. So taking ecological arguments and taking the biological health arguments, if these arguments are false scientifically, where do we stand? I am arguing that this is a social science debate turned biological debate. This isn't biology we're talking about, we're talking politics. So why should we be worried? Well, this is a graph of how we're producing crops and how we need more food. By 2050, we will not be able to produce food enough for everyone on this planet. People will be starving. People already are starving, but we can do something today but we can't do something in 2050. Look at this. So you have the dots at the start. So this is what we're producing for maize, rice, wheat, and soybean. The bolds, the non-dashed lines are where we predict that we're going to be producing, the yields, and the dashed lines is where we should be. And this is a huge difference. Okay. So if GM can be used to increase yields, this is a big solution. This is a big idea that we can use. So it's not just yields. To me, as an environmental scientist, natural scientist studying environmental sciences, I'm really passionate about using GM technology for the benefit of the environment. So I don't know if some of you in school have learned about eutrophication. Well, okay, so eutrophication is nitrates and phosphates applied on the land as fertilizer, running off into aquatic systems and causing destruction, essentially. You end up with these big algal blooms blocking sunlight, and eventually the plants underneath die, the bacteria feed on them, which uses up oxygen, and then the fish die, and then everything else dies, and it's just a gloopy mess. But this has ecological feedbacks to us. For instance, cholera. And even in the oceans, this is a big problem. You end up with harmful algal blooms and dead zones. And this could affect our fish stocks in a big way. This isn't really talked about. So how can GM help us? Well, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, they're investing in technology, GM technology, which would increase the uptake of these nitrates and phosphates. It's not talked about, but they're an amazing foundation. And finally, I want to talk about a societal benefit. Now, I'm sure a lot of you know about golden rice. How many of you have heard of golden rice? Yeah, quite a few. Okay, so there were some Swiss scientists, and they decided one day, okay, we're going to help solve a global problem. And this global problem was thousands of people dying every year. And not only that, thousands of children going blind every year in Asia. And they decided that a staple food, rice, they could modify it to put in beta-carotene, and this could be used to make vitamin A to cure death and blindness, okay? And they made this crop, and it only had 3 genes to make it in this crop, the beta-carotene. And this is the golden rice. It doesn't look very different apart from it's yellow. But the governments decided that they didn't want this. They didn't want to help thousands of people, to save thousands of people from death and blindness. They decided that this technology was too alien and it might affect the environment. How weird. So my message to you is that this is a social science debate, not a biological debate. We have to reevaluate our thinking. We have to re-educate children in schools. We have to do the reading, because Brexit is coming, and we will have to decide whether we embrace this technology or not. Thank you.